Thanks for tuning in to As the Tire Turns podcast. Before we dive into this week's episode, I'd like to thank our sponsor, AME International. Tire professionals insist on AME. I'd also like to recognize the AACF. For over 65 years, the Automotive Aftermarket Charitable Foundation has stood by those in the automotive aftermarket industry and their families during life's toughest challenges. Since 1959, with the incredible support of industry partners, AACF has provided vital assistance to individuals and families facing financial hardship due to unforeseen circumstances, such as floods, earthquakes, storms, fires, catastrophic medical conditions, life-changing accidents, devastating fatalities, and more. AACF offers a straightforward application process and a quick turnaround time for those needing support during critical moments. Visit www.aftermarketcharity.org to access the application and learn more about how AACF can assist during times of need. Together, we can make a difference in the lives of our automotive aftermarket family. Support AACF today. And now, As the Tire Turns. We are back with another episode of As the Tire Turns podcast. Today I'm joined by two guests, Doug Conley, President of Shamrock Marketing, and David Stevens, Managing Director of TRIB, Tire Retread Information Bureau. Not the TRIB, but I feel like people probably say the TRIB.
It goes all different sorts of manifestations of that, yeah.
Of TRIB. So, and TRIB obviously has a close relationship with the Tire Industry Association.
Absolutely.
But I recognized somewhere on my time on the executive board that I always refer to the association as TIA, but I feel like most of the staff and a lot of the other board members spell it out, TIA, right? So anyway, I guess you don't ever hear people say TRIB, do you?
Outside the U.S.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Interesting. So anyway, we were just chatting talking about the name of the podcast, and you were commenting, and we did as the whole purpose was, past presidents had told me that your year's going to go by quick, and this is kind of a passion project, if you will, to not only document my year. I don't know how well I did that, but really just interview some people who've made influence in my career and even just in the industry in general, and movers and shakers and so on. So I thought maybe the presidential podcast, I love alliteration, right? And I thought the double P sounding and so on. But I've heard other people say it's probably a disputed claim. It's like the Wilt Chamberlain, like the basketball when he scored 100 points or something. People say, I got the ball, right? They're like, no, somebody ran off with it. But John Malosi would always say, as the tire turns, like as a soap opera type thing, right? Because in the tire industry, we would joke that nobody leaves; they just show up with a different logo, right? Which I did. I never thought I would, right? But I did 14 years with that. Not did. It sounds like prison time, but anyway, I worked there. But so he came up with, would always say, as the tire turns, and I put it out on LinkedIn as hey, thinking of doing this, and it was probably 90% as the tire turns. Wow, so
that's what we wondered.
And then Riley, who was our producer, director, location scout, all that stuff, she had some snazzy graphics done, and here we are.
Yeah, it's a great name.
Yeah. But anyway, so thank you guys both for joining us. We'll talk a little bit about the Off the Road conference, but hopefully we'll be able to get this done. I feel a little bit like the base jumpers that climb a skyscraper and they're not really supposed to be there, and they just real quick jump off a building and throw a parachute and then disappear because we're in some borrowed space here at the Sheraton.
We're squatting.
We are squatters right now, except I suspect they're going to be able to evict us. So I appreciate you guys taking time out, both not only your busy schedules, but at this conference. And so, Doug, I'll start with you. If you've watched any of the episodes, one thing I love to find out is how I always say people didn't sit at home like you want to be a cop or a cowboy or whatever, right? Nobody thinks, I'm going to go into the tire industry, at least unless you're second or third generation, which you are, right? But how was there ever a path outside of the tire industry or?
Yeah, when I first started real work, like after college and had to find a job, I worked for a company called AC Nielsen.
Okay.
And AC Nielsen was known back in the day for the Nielsen Ratings on TV. But the division I worked in, which was in Markham, just north of Toronto, we did what was called a home scan. And at the time, there was a panel of participants across Canada, and they would scan every item that they brought into their home. And then that scanning data would be submitted when they cradled the unit, would be submitted into AC Nielsen's data banks, and then we would data geek it and turn it into marketing materials for the Procter & Gamble's of the world. And in Canada, there's Loblaws, which is like Kroger here. And so the retailers would have their data, and they use the point of scan data when they sell the products out the door at the grocery store, and then blend it with this home scan data. So anyway, I was on that path to be corporate guy in Markham, Ontario, and AC Nielsen marketing stuff. And you knew my dad, Doug Sr., so he'd always been in the tire industry. He started in Canada, General Tire Canada back in the 70s. And that side of the story is he was always given like the inner tubes, which were a by-the-way product for all the tire manufacturers back then. And from inner tubes, he ended up breaking out on his own and doing specialty tires in inner tubes. And General Tire at one time had retread plants. And the old man was tasked with helping manage those retread plants. And he sort of became amazed with the curing envelope and curing tubes, which were really popular back then. And long story short, he started a whole business around curing tubes and envelopes. And that's what Shamrock evolved from back in '92. So he and I had a conversation, and it's one of those situations where it's a what if. Like, I didn't want to get to 50, which comes pretty quick, and look back and say, what if I had, or should I have tried it? And I'd always wanted to be like a businessman and admired entrepreneurship and my dad started more than one business, and my uncle, and he's in the tire business in Canada too. So it's in the family, and I've been around it since I was a kid. I used to work at Shamrock in high school and cut envelopes and sort of saw what it took to run a business and everything that's involved in it. It's exciting. So at the time, I was able to get an H-1B work visa and come in, and my thought was I'll do 3 or 4 years and get that sort of international experience and find out if I like the business and the industry. And of course, 20-something years later, still doing it, and it's been a great adventure. It's like as the tire turns, once you get in, you're not getting out. Rubber gets in the blood. You go into a retread plant, you smell the buff as you approach, and there's just that feeling of, it's your industry, It's you either love it and most people can't relate to it. Most people don't even know, retreading exists or anything related to that. So
I was going to say it's one of the less sexy industries, but as I said, right, salt of the earth people, good, honest, living, can obviously make a buck or two and serves a purpose, right?
Yeah.
So
you
said, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, my kids, they're 12 and 10 years old, and they're becoming conscious of like environment and things like this. And David's doing a great job with TRIB getting this the green recognition that the industry deserves. And retreading is a green. It doesn't need any subsidies. It's a green industry since it was founded. Sure. And it's great to be able to tell our kids. And we've really looked at, internally at some of our marketing, and we launched a new catalog, and in the front of the catalog has a sustainability section, and it essentially says our mission is to help save the world one retread at a time. We make our contribution towards that, and I think that's something you can be proud of and get behind. So yeah.
There's a lot there, but the one thing that I'm going to jump into, and I was you mentioned Nielsen. Obviously, that world's been turned upside down,
Yeah.
right? We're probably all, to some degree, participating now because of streaming services and so on. And because of that, I was probably one of the last people, I feel like, to have discovered the TV show Arrested Development. But you mentioned a retail chain.
Yeah.
And are you familiar with the TV series?
I'm familiar. I don't know it very well, but I know of the series. And
So
seen clips
towards
and
the end, they had this attorney who I think, I don't know that matters, but I think was Scott Baio from like Happy Days fame.
Yeah.
But the attorney's name was Bob Loblaw, which I think is the name of the founder of the retail. But when said kind of quickly, it sounds like blah, 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 right? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
And so when you said that, I forgot that's a real place,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
So is it a grocery store?
Yeah, Loblaw. It's called Loblaws, and I think it's spelled. I should know how it's spelled, but it's spelled more like Loblaws or Loblaws.
I think it's Loblaw,
Yeah,
maybe.
so people if you're not from Canada, you mispronounce it. But Loblaws is. They're going to love this if they get credit. Loblaws is like the Kroger up. I don't want to say that. Kroger is like the Loblaws of. But yeah, it's probably the biggest. And they own other named stores that are like they actually have a place in Canada. They have No Name is the name of the grocery store.
That's beautiful.
It's like a no frills place.
Yeah.
You have to pay for the bags, which is now everybody does, I guess, to some degree. But back then it was like 10 cents for a bag. But no frills was literally you went there. As a college kid, we'd go there and just, you buy the meat that's almost expired and whatever else. But so they have their footprint, and I think they also now own Shoppers Drug Mart, which is the biggest drugstore chain up there. So they're everywhere. Yeah.
What's interesting, company Shamrock Marketing, right? And obviously AME, we do a lot of marketing and private brand. But you mentioned the no frills. Back in the day, I remember shopping, and the one grocery store would have the generic aisle.
Yeah.
And boy, they did not spare expense. Like everything was pretty much white label, black writing, and it would say peanut butter, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And then at some point, somebody decided, you can have these private brands from the discount retailers. And my mom had worked in a business, and they did frozen storage. So they would do like whole plants that were operating, and so. At the time, Breyer's ice cream was one. Yeah. And she would go through afterwards, right, follow-up inspection, and she would say, boy, it was coming through, and there was Pathmark ice cream or Acme. We lived in Northeast, right? And they're not going out, and they're contracting that with somebody. So it kind of at an earlier age opened me to private branding, private label, and
in my Nielsen days. On that note, there was. I think it was Loblaws. They had Dave Nichols came up with what's called President's Choice. I think he was the president of Loblaws at the time.
Yeah.
But he was the first guy that really took private label and gave it not just a generic label, but it became President's Choice.
Yeah.
And then probably today, I don't know for a fact, but I would hazard to guess that they probably have like 50% market share in certain categories.
Yeah.
It's become very popular, and you would go into, like my mom, you go into her fridge and it'd be President's Choice everything, right?
Yeah.
Because it became not just a good price, but very good quality. And so it competed with like Heinz ketchup and everything else. And now I think in the States you see that a lot. Like Kroger has their own brand, and Costco has, Kirkland. And I mean, those are big brands now for the retailers.
Absolutely.
And so the manufacturers, of course, had to go through that learning curve of how do we fit it into our mix?
Correct.
What's the brand strategy? And it all became part of the distribution for them. So
So you mentioned sustainability, and David, I know you came in as managing director of Tire Retread Information Bureau. Was that your first entry into leading the association into the tire industry?
It was, yeah. Absolutely.
And go ahead.
I was just going to say, no, I had a almost 2-decade career in a bunch of different corporate entities. I worked in the telecommunications industry for MCI back in the day, all sort of like marketing, sales, partnership, development.
So quiet you can hear a pin drop, right? Was that MCI?
No, they were the friends and family. Like you get your circle of friends, right? And you got a discount.
Yeah.
So I worked for them. I worked in the credit card industry for a couple of years, and then I worked for AOL
Yep.
And AOL took me outside the U.S., so I worked and lived in Japan for a couple of years in Tokyo.
Oh, great.
And then it took me to England, and I was in London for about 8 years.
Okay.
And I finished my career there with E-Trade, the online financial services firm, and was planning to come back to the U.S. for a number of reasons. And I actually went to college with Mike Barra from Community Tire.
Yeah.
And he reached out to me and said, hey, I'm involved with this association. We're looking to make a change.
Yeah.
You have an interesting background. Would you ever consider working in the tire industry? And my immediate response was no.
Yeah.
I don't know anything.
Well, especially E-Trade, cutting edge, right? Telecommunication. I mean, kind of, more advanced technology than perceived, right? And we'll talk a little bit about the retread equipment. There's some pretty advanced, technology that exists, but the initial perception is tires, no, right?
It's a very different, and I didn't know anything about it, and so that was my initial response. And then he and his dad and Marvin Bozarth, one of the legends in the tire industry, just kept working me over.
Yeah.
And I went to St. Louis and met with those guys, and they talked to me about the industry. And the more I learned about it, and especially the retread side of the business, the economic benefits, the environmental benefits, and the opportunity to take on the leadership of this association and try and take it into a new direction.
Sure.
That all sort of piqued my interest. And, someone, and I don't remember who initially said this to me, but, once I started, they said, look, you've got 90 days. Because if you don't leave the tire industry in the first 90 days,
you're in it.
You're stuck for life. So here we are. I'm on my 15th year of doing this. And I think, you touched on it a little bit, but I think the thing that ultimately drew me in and keeps me here is the people.
Absolutely.
So I've never, having worked across all those different industries and having worked in a lot of different countries, I have never come across a group of people that are as down to earth, as focused on seeing the entire industry succeed as a whole. They may be fierce competitors, but at the same time, they're fierce collaborators on making sure that the industry is strong and grows. And I love the family orientation of a lot of these businesses as well, right?
Yeah.
You're talking third generation, oftentimes, businesses that may have started with a corner service location.
Absolutely.
And now they're, several million or billion-dollar businesses that are still treat their employees as family members and want to see them grow and succeed as well. So those are the things that help keep me in the industry, and I think that's what keeps a lot of people here as well.
Sure. So you came in after Harvey Brodsky, right? Mm-hmm. So and then Harvey, right, started his own association, and in some aspects, right, hey, if it's promoting retreading, that's good. But did you ever get to really have much of a working relationship with Harvey? And obviously you attended a lot of the same events and so on. But I really don't know did you have much of a relationship with Harvey?
To be honest with you, I didn't. I mean, I met him and talked to him at several different events, including the OTR conference.
Sure.
And I think in a different life and a different schedule, we would have been
Absolutely.
great friends and working together to do what we could. And there was a little bit of competition there, which is also healthy in its way. We were both trying to do the best things that we could for the retread and tire repair industries. So, but I had some great mentors in the industry that helped boost my knowledge very quickly and have continued to, I'm 15 years later and I'm still learning new stuff, which is also fun.
It's true. I got to spend, some time with him, but one of the earlier, and actually we share that Mike Barra recruited me actually I met him at a TRIB event Bergey's Tire was hosting, and Harvey was speaking with the infamous, roll out the piece of luggage with the tire tread that he would have, right? The virgin tire. But I just kind of said, okay, our business wasn't directly related to retreading, but obviously a lot of the people use our tools were into the retreading space, and we just joined because I was just going to support him, right? I mean, he was, and back in those days, I think he spent a lot of time, it was at the cusp of the internet, right? Certainly when I met him, and he had been doing it for obviously decades before, but he spent a lot of time just trying to police because, there'd be an incident or something and a state trooper or press, anything would get printed in the paper, whether it was accurate or not. And so I think retreading had a lot to defend, but I think you've evolved and changed, right, in so much. And can you talk a little bit about maybe the mission of TRIB and also as part of that, I think years and years ago, I don't know the stats, right, but there were a lot of independently owned retread shops that would do that, and then either through consolidation or the bigger, right, the rubber companies basically buying up and so on. How has the mission evolved, right? Because you may have there may be the same number of tons, I don't know how it's measured, in retreading that gets done, but it's a much smaller number of things. We see it happen with Tire Industry Association with dealer members as well, right?
Yeah.
Somebody snaps up, 400 stores or 200 stores or something like that. So anyway.
Yeah, no, there's a couple of things in there. Our association, our mission is to promote and defend the tire retreading and tire repair industries. And even for me, 15 years ago when I first started, the defend side of that was a bigger part of our jobs.
Right.
It was responding to potential legislation, responding to TV newscasts that talk about rubber on the roads, a blog post, a magazine article. And thankfully, today, that is a very minor part of what we do. And so we are able to focus more on the promote side of how do we educate people about the benefits of retreading.
Yeah.
So I'd like to take some credit for that.
Sure.
It's been a lot of work in educating people about tackling those myths and misconceptions about retreading and helping people understand the benefits of it.
Yeah.
So I think it's been a great evolution for me to see in terms of what we focus on and what we are able to focus on.
Yeah.
And I think the second part of what you said is absolutely true. If you go back far enough, we had 20,000 retread plants.
Wow.
In the U.S. Now, a lot of those were focused on passenger tire retreading.
I was going to say passenger, right? Yeah.
And, there are a lot of reasons why that disappeared, but now we're in a stage where we're, 650, 680 retread plants in the U.S. Yet, and you mentioned a little bit, the amount of rubber that's being used, the amount of retreads that are being produced has basically stayed the same or grown slightly. So even though there's a lot of consolidation, the amount of retreads that are being produced is still flat or growing.
Right.
And it's that I think speaks to the benefits again of retreading. Especially in the commercial trucking industry, it just makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
I'll pipe in on one thing there too. So the Mid-American Truck Show in Louisville is a annual show that TRIB does a great booth at, which is Spot the Retreads, right?
Yeah.
So we put out several tires and mixed in our new and retreaded tires. And the challenge to the truckers that come to the booth is to spot the retread.
Yeah.
And it is a very effective method of, I can't believe that's a retread, or you're telling me that's not a new tire?
Yeah.
And the conversations, because I've been participating in that in some form or another for 20 years, and the conversations, and David could speak to this in more detail, have changed or evolved. I think in general, the summary is today's retread is more reliable and better built than it was 20 years ago, because the truckers themselves aren't saying, I had a blowout on, I-95 and I'll never buy a retread again. It's more like last year we had a guy come by the booth and he told a story about driving through Phoenix at 120 degrees Fahrenheit, and his recaps held on and you could spit on them. They were steaming, but those bad boys ran. Yeah. And, that's the stories you hear today more than, I had something blow out and I'm never going to buy a retread again. So
yeah,
it's it's
Yeah.
improved.
Well, people have said, retreading is recycling. I mean, it's you're getting 2 and 3 or maybe 4 extended uses out of that casing,
Yeah.
right? And again, I'm sure you probably know, right? How much petroleum is saved and so on. But it's a significant savings over the practice of constantly buying new or virgin tires.
Yeah,
right?
and I think that's and if you look at the industry overall, the users of retreaded tires, the medium to big fleets are massive users of it. So
Yeah.
89% of fleets that have 100 or more trucks use retreaded tires.
Yep.
And they do that because they're constantly testing, they're tracking their expenses down to the fraction of a penny,
Yep.
and they know that a quality new tire with multiple retreads delivers the lowest cost of ownership
Yep.
and cost per mile. So, and I think that those conversations we have at the trucking shows, as Doug was saying, we've seen that evolution as well, where they do understand it, but there is still some misunderstanding. So some people don't know that a quality commercial truck tire is specifically engineered and designed to be retreaded multiple times.
Yeah.
And it has warranties attached to it. Now, those low-cost, one-and-done Asian imported tires
Yep.
don't have a warranty. They're not a good enough quality to often be retreaded. So, you get the performance out of it, which is often less than a retreaded tire
Yeah.
or a comparable new tire. And then what does that tire what has to happen to that? It either goes into the recycling stream, hopefully,
Yeah.
Yeah.
or it ends up in a landfill or a side of the road because it can't be reused again.
Yeah. We've talked about the negative publicity, and really what it boils down to is so many people think that any scrap they see on the road has got to be from a retread. Because, like, to your point, a lot of people aren't familiar with the whole retreading, right? Unless you're kind of in the business or industry, And so they see a piece on there and they say, oh, well, I know they'll put tread back on. But that could very easily be a virgin tire or a brand new tire, right?
Yeah.
The separation doesn't mean that it was a poor job done, right? It's from the flexing and underinflation, right? I think is the cause of premature tire failure, right? There might be some other minority, but that's the large thing and that's why it's so critically important, and why fleets will do regular pressure checks and to make sure to spot anything, do a proper repair, get it to hold air. I've talked to some people who would say the tire's almost too well built, in that if your engine's performing at 30% or 40%, right, you could never operate your vehicle, other systems, but you can run a tire at half inflation.
Mm-hmm.
It sure as heck isn't good,
Yeah.
right, and it's noticeable, right, to others, but you could kind of limp by with it, right, really operating at half the proper air pressure. So
Yeah. Well, NHTSA did a huge study where they picked up thousands of tire fragments from the road in
Yeah.
the U.S., different geographies, different climates, and they analyzed all those fragments. And what they found is exactly what you said. The tire fragments that failed were from new tires and retreaded tires in equal proportion.
Yeah.
And it's underinflation, overloading. They hit some debris on the road and pick up an injury anyway.
Yeah.
So it has nothing to do with the manufacturing process or the
Yeah.
retreading process. And so that's what, we're big proponents of TPMS or automated inflation systems, because if you can keep air in the tire,
sure,
you're gonna save your investment, and that tire is gonna be a great candidate to be retreaded.
well, and/or alert.
Yeah,
Like, hey, you got an
you-
issue.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We at the golf outing yesterday, it was funny. We're on the 16th. We started on the first hole, so 16th. We're near end of the day, and the beer cart rolls up, and the passenger side rear tire is 30% flat. And I'm like, we got all these tire guys here. Can't wait. So there's guys out poking the tire.
That's funny.
You'll be fine. To your point, you can drive back to the clubhouse. You'll
Yeah.
be fine. You can run. She probably ran all day like that in the heat and the sun, and
Yeah.
it was still holding up. And that's beer cart tires doing its thing.
Yeah. So you mentioned, right, golf. We're at the Off the Road conference, which is put on each year by Tire Industry Association, and often there's some panels on retreading viability, and we've seen some pretty cool. I don't remember the retreader, but I think somebody had like how it's made. come into one of their, one of those type like Discovery Channel shops, and it is a fascinating process to watch either new tire construction or the retread facility, and I've been in facilities in Latin America and certainly here in Europe, retread, but the technology, I mean, there is some really high tech technology that goes into a retread shop, right? I always think shearography, right? It's just kind of a layman's term, like an X-ray almost, right? Be able to let you actually kind of see and so on. Doug, I mean, that's certainly your wheelhouse, and I know a lot of automotive equipment comes from Italy, but there's Turkey, Germany, right? And so on. Can you talk a little bit about the how that's evolved from?
Yeah. Well, I think our industry is a little bit behind the curve, to put it probably politely, as far as adapting technology.
Sure.
And people always say, "Oh, when COVID occurred, all these things happened." The labor shortage, I think, really opened everyone's eyes. So, in the past, a retread plant's not the most attractive place to work for people, right? I mean, skiving a tire all day is probably not what you aspire to do coming out of high school or whatever. So most manufacturing facilities you go into today, automation is everywhere.
Sure.
Whether it's a car plant doing assembly or a new tire manufacturing facility. In retreading, it's still very labor dependent. So the technology itself could be state of the art, yet we still have a labor component that it's dependent on. Initial inspection is a great example. So we do what's called NDT, non-destructive testing to the tire, which includes geography, but high voltage current to identify if there's a hole in the tire. And the tire will spark, or pardon me, the high voltage equipment will spark and notify the operator, hey, this is there's something here that needs to probably go to the repair area. And so and that technology was founded by Hawkinson in like 1982, and it's largely the same as it was in 82 today, and completely dependent on the operator. So if the operator doesn't mark the tire correctly at that point, the tire won't follow the right path in the retreading process. So to jump all the way to having AI and high tech cameras and robotics is a pretty big lift from where we are. So there's going to be incremental change, and there already is incremental change, and a lot of use of data and RFID and identifying tags, and that process will continue to evolve. I think we would like it to see it evolve more quickly than it is, but the other challenge is that I think in our industry, oftentimes technology that comes into it is borrowed from somewhere else, just because there's, like David mentioned, 650 plants in the United States and 16 million truck tire units retreaded.
Yeah.
For a lot of technology companies or people developing stuff, that's not a huge market, right?
Yeah.
It's a niche, it's very specialized. So it's oftentimes borrowing technology. So geography is a great example. I don't know what other industries it's used in, steel, I suppose, and so it's borrowed from other industries and brought into the tire industry, or into the retreading industry specifically. So.
Yeah, and I think that uses, right, does it use Zeiss? Like, is that, like, I always associate that with camera lenses and so on, right? But it's really, it's being used for this industry. So, okay. I sense we may have to be base jumping out of here soon. so I guess in closing, is there any closing thoughts that either of you have? And again, I sincerely appreciate you spending some time with me. But anything that you wanted to touch on before we wrap? Wrap up, by the way, not like rap battle or spit some rhymes or anything like that. Yeah, we can do that as well.
We can do that. Yeah, I wonder if it'd be better than the halftime show at the Super Bowl. I don't know. I think we could do better, especially Keith. He's talented.
I want to see Doug drop a diss track.
Dougie Fresh.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
I'll just mention a couple of things. I mean,
Sure.
we, as Doug talked a little bit about, obviously the sustainability part of the reach hunting industry is huge.
Sure.
And so we have a handful of things that are our top priorities as an organization, and one of those things is measuring sustainability in a certifiable way so that we can capture those environmental savings for the reach out industry and then be able to talk about that with the public at large.
Sure.
So, because it is, despite what's happening in the political environment, the environmental savings themselves from reach hunting, the reuse of rubber, steel, all those chemicals that go into it is a huge component of what we do as an industry.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that we're really focused on, what we hear from our members, which is not unique, obviously, to the reach out industry, but if I ask, what are the top 3 things challenges you have? And many people will say, finding people, training people, keeping people.
Yeah.
And so we're making efforts to help our members find people within the industry, trying to bring people into the tire industry and specifically the reach out industry. And we have some stuff that we're going to roll out later this year that will help with that. So,
Okay, great. Yeah, that's key for any business. I think any industry, especially. I'm too young, right? My grandparents would talk about, and the depression and things. And I think COVID is one of those things that'll, 20 years from now, you thought, well, before COVID or post-COVID. Yeah. But I think coming out of COVID, right, just finding, retaining, people is certainly a challenge. So, yeah.
I'm a big podcast proponent. I think we've maybe talked about it before. So, I think you've done a great job with the concept and the guests you've had on. So. But my question for you is, when you're not producing a podcast and asking the questions, and you jump on the airplane or in the car to do a road trip, what podcast is Keith Jarman turning on to listen to?
I'm actually terrible. I don't listen to podcasts.
Well, you listen to your own, don't you? You probably listen to your own.
I do have to. It is without exposing Riley, who's off camera, right? But. She does have me just run through every episode to make sure there's no corrections, edits, and also I'll help with some of the the tags or whatever that go on about the episode. And but she does a fantastic job, and so I do listen to everyone on like 1.25, right? And kind of blitz through it. And sometimes I'll if I hear it on 1.25 and it sounds slow, or if I'm like. I'm like, that's going to sound hideous. I have tried to minimize my because I guess that drives her a little bit crazy in the editing. But I have had some sales podcasts I've tried to, and I'll do it on occasionally. If I go take a walk or something, try and listen. And email when I'm on a flight is my chunk of time where I'll power through emails. The office would always say we could tell when you were flying. Yeah. Because I'd have and since COVID I don't fly nearly as much as I used to. I've pulled back some, taken some road trips. I think all of us have. We've talked about teams and things like that. Where you used to pop on a plane to go see someone. I'm still a big proponent of face-to-face or belly-to-belly, communication. But I feel terrible. I'm not a podcast guy. I download a lot, and I'm like, I'm going to listen to that. Boy, that sounds great, and I just don't ever partake. How many subscribers and downloads do you guys get on these podcasts? Do you know? It is tens. This one will get into the 20s, I hope. Yeah, we're going to promote it. I'll tell you what, I am impressed. We just released one, and Brett Wagner, who was one of the guys, partners in starting the business, been in the industry. He referenced some mentors, and they release almost on a Monday when we do them. They go like at noon. Yeah. At 2:00, he had a guy call him, and my first initial was like, shouldn't he be working, right? But the route people or the people who are calling on customers, I think more so, because my commute's 15 minutes max, right?
Yeah.
So I don't, and I'm not religious about going to the gym. I know you probably figured that one out, right? But so I think a lot of people in our industry, which I was talking with Greg Smith with Modern Tire Dealer, and of course they're all into that Nielsen type research, and he says automotive, a lot more listeners than viewers.
Yeah.
And so when I do watch, I always go to she sends me a YouTube link, but I watch it. But that's how I would consume it.
Okay, YouTube.
But I notice most people will get it on either Spotify or iTunes, and I don't know what that number is. It's bigger than what I thought it would be. I don't know. I kind of said if we had an episode that had 1,000 views, right? I know they tell you, especially as a girl dad with kids, you're not supposed to put your value in likes and things like that. But I am surprised, even at this conference, people have come up and commented about specific episodes or said, hey, are you going to keep doing it? And I said, well, we're doing one more episode or one more year and just one a month, right? You know, and then it really is done. But I've enjoyed it. It's been great for me. A lot of people have said it's nice. You know, it's kind of refreshing to get to see some behind the scenes and so on.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I wish I can't even tell you. Jeffrey Gittimer is the one. Well, on occasion I listen to Dave Ramsey guy, right? You know that Tom Fermonic works, or his daughter works with him, and just on personal finance and so on. But
it's such a people industry, which you've talked about, and TRIB right now, David's doing a piece, and it's called like Meet the Board.
Yeah.
The board of directors.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. Like we do business with these folks and you know, board activities. And when you ask certain questions, like what's something people would be surprised to learn about you, right?
Yeah.
Constantly, it's because that's not something you normally come across in a natural conversation, right? And to read some of this stuff that some of the guys have experienced and how they got into the industry, and it's fascinating. So this podcast is a little bit like that, but that getting deeper level stuff, and you start to find out all these different experiences people have, and it's fascinating. It really is.
my youngest daughter is here this week, and she's gotten to know, right, having met a lot of the people. I've been on the board a long time, summer meetings and so on. So I don't remember even who she was talking to, but I was kind of blushing because she was commenting about, you know, he likes to paint. And they're like, what? Right? You know, and it's to that point, right? That, you know, you're like, I've known him all this time, but like, no, I cannot see him. They're like, he's got brushes and he's got this, right? You know, just going on and stuff. And he's good. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not that good, right? But it's just kind of just, you know, I can't say it's something I do all the time or whatever, but to that point, you're like, well, I never pictured that. So what are two quick things about you guys that the audience wouldn't know?
I'll let David go first.
Oh, God. Wow.
Well, while you're thinking about it, because you did mention your dad earlier, and one of the great memories is actually at this conference. We got to chat and talk about doing some business, right? And he says, you smoke cigars, right? You know, and again, as a good Canadian, right? You know, he's like, you want some Cubans, right? You know, it's kind of like that. You want to buy a watch or whatever. But, and he sent me some Cuban cigars afterwards, which now you can get them in the States, but at the time, right, you couldn't get them. So that was kind of a treat. I'm like, wow, this guy gave me, and then you and I've talked about the handwritten notes and going through stuff. I found it, and I think I sent that to you.
You sent that to me. I was really that was really special because he was a handwritten. He took time to write a letter. It's like that old saying, if I had more time, I would have written a shorter letter. Yeah. And he was always good about taking time and making sure the letter was concise, and then a handwritten note and little things that people come up to me to this day and say, hey, I remember your dad, he gave me this pocket knife or this Cuban cigar or you know, whatever it is. And you sent me that original. I think you guys had just started out on with AME at the time, right? Like pretty fresh.
Correct. It was. I think it was after the Hawaiian, which was 2008, right? So
because he was in his letter to you, which you'd sent to me, he'd mentioned that, and best of luck, and you guys will do it. Yeah. And so it's again, that's the people side of it, and it just, you sent that to me. I still have it in my office, frankly, with your note that was attached to it. So, yeah.
Well, so you were telling me, right, as he was, you know, I don't know, was it cancer?
No, he had some health issues with kidneys in the end and liver stuff.
But I remember you talking about kind of, were you in a convertible driving through, like taking a drive with him or something?
Yeah,
Was it just driving around? I don't know if cars are a passion.
Well,
or
yeah, he was a big car guy. So towards the end of his life, the last few days, he just wanted to go for a ride. And he as he got towards the end, he'd always wanted a Bentley. So he went out and got a Bentley, and then he said, I want to go for a ride through Cherokee Park and these areas of Louisville. He said, so I drove, my sister's with us, and he just wanted to go for a drive in his car and sneak a smoke and just one last drive. Yeah, so he was a big car guy. I always had cars and old trucks and motorcycles, and so we shared that passion. And used to, Halloween every year, we used to put on werewolf masks and go out on the Harleys and stop around and see the folks, and people awesome. Honk and wave, and it was always a fun experience.
That is your something we wouldn't know, the werewolf mask.
The werewolf mask, yeah. So, I'll send you a picture you can put on the podcast. Him and I out front of the Shamrock with the werewolf mask on, just getting ready to go for a ride. So
I love it. And so, David, I hope that was enough time and you were only half listening and half thinking. So something for you, something real quick, because I feel like we are going to base jump here in a minute. Yeah.
No, I mean, I think it's a big shout out to Tia for bringing in the Truckers Against Trafficking.
Yeah.
So I went and saw that session today, and it's amazing the work that they're doing. And it's nowhere near that, but I try and stay involved in a couple of local organizations in DC.
Yeah.
And one is called the DuPont Circle Village.
Okay.
And DC is unique. Well, I live right in downtown DC, and it divides. You have young families that have preschool children, or older people who have come back to DC, or their kids have flown the coop, and a lot of them are alone.
Yeah.
Right. And so they've created this village in our neighborhood that helps do basic tasks, and it's anything. They put on social events. They do technology seminars. Help them with a computer. So. Involved with that organization.
That's
and then
great.
For a number of years, I've volunteered with Big Brothers of DC.
Good.
So I have a little brother that I've been mentoring for quite a while, and we have a great relationship, and it's very rewarding for me.
Yeah.
And so that's something personal about that I'm involved in that I feel passionate about.
That's great. All right. Well, gentlemen, again, I can't thank you enough for the time. Appreciate you sitting down with us. And that is another episode of As the Tire Turns podcast. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of As the Tire Turns podcast.